Wuthering Waves released on the 23rd of May 2024, and it's been about a week or two since then, and I've been experiencing the game on a daily basis. The game has seen a pretty moderate success, but there have already been many instances of people pointing out good and bad things included in the game. But this video is different, and I want to welcome you to my analysis of the design of Wuthering Waves, where we'll be talking, explaining, analyzing, and potentially offering fixes for any bad design decisions or problematic design decisions that have been implemented into Wuthering Waves, and to of course compare them to its main competitor Genshin Impact. This video is not a WoWa versus Genshin video. What I will be doing is comparing the designs of the two in order to show how they each affected the player, not if one is better than the other. The main reason I'm using Genshin is of course because it's the newest and also popular game, and I believe that it has many elements that will serve as very good examples to show the good things that Wuthering Waves does and many of the major flaws that it has in its design. So, let's begin. Before we get into specific chapters, I want to mention something. The game has only been out for about a week or two, yet I am seeing people judge the rewards that they are getting out of the tacit fields, the main niche farming spots in the game comparable to artifact domains in Genshin, and of the training simulation that offers character XP materials, weapon XP materials, and the game's currency shell credits. I thought that people had learned from Genshin as their first gacha, or just from playing any other gacha, that these rewards usually scale. Yet people on low world levels without access to the higher difficulties of these farm spots ran to social media to complain, as they always do. So the first point I want to make is wait. Until anybody reaches the end game in WoWa and in any gacha game, then flaws like low rewards will not be revealed. Until we know what kind and what amount these farm spots will give us in the max or second to max Soul 3 level, then there is no justifiable reason to complain about rewards of these spots. This is exactly how gacha games work. The early game is a simple power spike, things are easy and you level up all kinds of systems like crazy because they have been made easy to progress in the early game and give you plenty of rewards. And in WoWa and its early game, you are encouraged to explore the world, do the main and side quests, and forget about heavily min-maxing your characters and power level. Then follows the mid-game, where now the game slows down as content slowly comes out, and since there isn't much to do, your main goal transforms to slowly raising the power level of your characters. But because energy is limited, and you most likely have plenty of characters and aspects of these characters to upgrade, you enter a stage of feeling like you don't get that many rewards, or most likely you wish for more energy. And finally comes endgame, where you now want to fully max out your characters and you can pre-farm for new ones, and this is where problems in reward balance will show themselves, not 1 week into release. That's that for this prelude. I wanted to get you into the mindset that we are only 1 week into release, and as we discover the deeper mechanisms of the game, then we will be able to form justifiable opinions on these systems in WoWa. But I want to mention that the things I will discuss in this video are much more general, and their application scale is basically the entire game, so they are about 95%, I would say, not affected by this. So let's now begin with our first main chapter, the Overworld. The first thing you will interact with in a standard open world game. The Overworld in WoWa, from my experience, has been crafted really well. It draws massive inspiration from Genshin and Breath of the Wild, but puts its own twist into it in order to stand out from those two. I don't have that many notes on the Overworld in WoWa. It contains exactly what it should contain. A variety of environments to explore, enemies to defeat for rewards, bosses, and puzzles. Now the main observation that I made when I started the game that took my interest were burning bushes. Yeah, coming from Genshin, I really set myself up for this, but it goes to show how well crafted the design of the overworld is in Genshin, where interactions like this can make a pretty big difference in how a player feels while playing the game. In WoWa, the only way to get rid of these thorn bushes is to use the levitator function of your terminal to throw an exploding flower at the bush. But in Genshin, the element system not only allows a similar way of overcoming such an obstacle, like exploding barrels, but it also allows characters to interact with it. Thankfully, this is the only time such a thing happens where we are allowed to do a comparison like this. Because in WoWa, any other puzzles, if they have similarities with Genshin, have been de-elementized. A good example is the pressure sensors all around the map. In Genshin, one can use a geoconstruct to trigger the sensor, but in WoA, since geoconstructs don't exist, then a simple cube that you use the levitator on, or those explosive flowers, work exactly as intended. And this is what I mean by de-elementizing these puzzles. The Overworld designers have done a very good job on creating their own puzzle types, or taking puzzles focused around elements and making sure they work in a game that doesn't contain interactions like in Genshin. And I can't think of a better way to transition to the next and most important chapter. I believe, for some ending words, that the Overworld in WoA does exactly what it needs to do, and it contains exactly what it needs to contain. I had, and I'm having a blast exploring the Overworld. But now, it's time for the big thing. Combat. WoA has been advertised as a game focused on combat. Kuro Games and their previous game, Punishing Grey Raven, has given them a fair taste of constructing combat systems for games that are deep and very flashy, but the important note is that they really want to focus on combat. After getting some experience with the combat in WoA, I really fell in love because I felt like I was back in NieR Automata with the freedom and flow of movement that the game gives a player, and I also felt the familiarity with Genshin, with gathering energy for the resonance liberations and switching between characters to combo their abilities. The addition of intro skills and the different effects that characters can get from filling in the bar on the bottom, their forte meter, with their own mechanics are very unique and fresh. But there is a glaring problem in WoA's combat, and that is the attribute system attached to characters and enemies. And I will be splitting it into 3 categories in order to analyze it and show its flaws in design. And also, as a note, I will be sometimes calling it element system because that helps with comparisons. Starting with systems. The first category does sound a little broad, but it refers to depth that a player can find inside of combat. You can call them mechanics, but I prefer the term systems. And my main example for these systems is energy. In your typical turn-based RPG or action-affected RPG, I don't know the correct term for those, but they are RPGs where combat is done automatically and you use skills to break in that flow. Any ultimate skill is usually charged by using other lesser skills or simply by attacking. In Genshin and WoA, a character's ultimate, named Elemental Burst and Resonance Liberation respectively, can only be activated if they are off cooldown and if the character possesses enough energy. While simple and similar in description to the classic RPGs, Genshin has gone a really big step forward through the Elemental Particle system, where abilities, instead of just giving a character or characters energy just by being used, they instead generate particles, usually when they hit an enemy, that slowly fly towards your character, and additionally, enemies drop particles when defeated and sometimes when they reach a certain percent of their HP. This changes a lot of stuff, and most importantly adds depth into the combat by introducing strategies such as funneling. Funneling is when a character will use their skill, but then they will be switched away in order for another character to receive the particles. Because in Genshin, only the on-field character will benefit fully from these particles. Other characters will not. And this is tied to the element system in Genshin because naturally, characters create particles of their own element, and different element characters benefit less from those particles. The energy particle system is amazing. Not only for this reason, but because it also guides players into building their teams. It brings reason as well into using 2 characters or more of the same element in a team. And it also allows players to assign roles to characters related to this system, such as being a battery, a character whose main purpose is to generate as many particles as possible for the team. And there are even more details into the system, such as the energy regeneration stat. As the name suggests, more energy recharge means more energy restored, but in Genshin this only applies to those particles. Any effect that mentions restoration of energy is not affected by the stat. In WoA, there is a small hint of this system, but it only appears when enemies get killed, where a small particle or particles will fly towards your characters. But it's completely neutral, it doesn't have an element. Additionally, from my observations, there is no reason to put characters of the same element in a team because there's no difference in the energy characters get when another uses a skill. They will get the same amount of energy. Characters do give energy to other characters when they use their abilities and other things, but again, there's no difference if they are of the same element. And Genshin goes another step forward with systems with the elemental resonance system, which makes it so that if two characters of the same element are in a team, the entire team gets a buff or an effect. And because Genshin has teams of 4, then you can have 2 resonances activated at the same time. Once again, the thing that this brings is guidance for team building, a helping hand to introduce a player to proper team building and to introduce interesting combos that take advantage of the system. Now, WoW does only have 3 characters per team, but nothing like the elemental resonance system exists, and this is to show you, as I said, the flaws that WoW's element system has. And because I am somehow blessed, I guess, with crazy insight into game design, I don't know, it just comes out naturally. My main suggestion would be that intro skills, counterattacks, and perhaps dodge counters should also generate those energy particles. They do restore energy, dodging and counterattacking do restore energy, same with intro skills. But using the particles that come out of enemies when they die, and putting them into these as well, this brings a lot of thought that can go to building a team, and makes interactions with the characters more interesting. Imagine using Verina's awesome Concerto energy restoration to not only trigger a lot of intro skills to break an enemy's stagger shield, but to also generate particles for the characters you are switching to. Or imagine having your HP support out to dodge an enemy's attacks not only because they are tanky, but because you want them to dodge and counterattack to recharge their supporting liberation faster. See how much food for thought a simple change makes? And we can push the limit even further. Maybe we can make it so that if the character that you switch to is of the same element, they generate 2 particles with their intro skill, bringing a massive helping hand to team structure and team building how-to. And using Genshin as an inspiration, we can take the absolutely amazing idea that they created, where there are things other than characters that can generate particles, and put it to WoW. The Favonius series of weapons in Genshin generate particles when a critical hit is made, and taking inspiration from that, we can also create weapons that generate or affect the particle generation of the effect I mentioned before. A weapon that +1s the particles generated by the equipping character or the switched in character, with a cooldown on this effect that lowers as you increase the weapon's rank. A character's outro skill that makes it so that they benefit extra from the particles that will be generated when they get switched out. So many ideas spring to mind just from this simple change alone, and so many interesting interactions with characters come forth. So to close out this first category for combat, WoW's combat lacks any sort of systems related or not to characters' attributes, and seeing the comparison to its competitor, where these systems allow the designers, and more importantly, the players, to create all sorts of unique interactions and effects for many aspects in the game like weapons, makes it feel like WoW's combat was not finalized before release. And we move on to our next category, or I should say categories, because the other two have a very similar base, but are different enough to allow us to split them apart. And those are character interactions with each other and character interactions with enemies. Let's start with the former, interactions with other characters. I believe that this one doesn't need a really detailed explanation on what it is. Simply put, it's characters and their abilities, and how they interact with other characters and their abilities, or just what combos can a player do with their characters. Checking in with Genshin, man oh man, what insane things did the designers do to come up with elemental reactions. What an insane thing they are. In most RPGs, elements don't really do much with each other. They have their special interactions, which are reserved for the next category, but Genshin came out and changed everything about elements in RPGs. Every single character can interact with another simply by combining their elements through their abilities, and it's the absolute foundation of everything in Genshin. It has paved the way for the creation of just about everything that players have discovered they can do within the game. From simple ways to increase damage, other than using stat buffs, to the most creative and interesting ways to get through challenges they face. And the craziest and funniest team names anybody can think of. Elemental reactions absolutely need to be studied by someone to understand good game design. But we're not here to praise Genshin, but to use it to see WoW's strengths and weaknesses. So, how do characters interact with each other in WoW? The answer is that they don't. Yeah, what can I say? Unfortunately, characters in WoW have really bare bones interactions with each other, and most importantly, their attributes mean absolutely nothing. What is the difference between a Giyan triggering Verina's liberation coordinated attacks and a Giyan triggering Mortefi's liberation coordinated attacks? None. There is absolutely no difference whatsoever between these two examples. I'm not joking or hiding anything, there is literally no difference. There isn't anything that changes. Or another example, what is the difference between an Aero Giyan triggering Fusion Mortefi's coordinated attacks and a Havoc Giyan triggering Fusion Mortefi's coordinated attacks? There is none. But what is the difference between a Pyrodilic triggering a Hydro Zinc Shoes coordinated attacks and a Pyrodilic triggering an Electro Rydens coordinated attacks? Well, the first one triggers Vaporize, increasing damage dealt, and the second one triggers Overload, creating an explosion. No matter what combination of characters you present in Wuwa, their interactions are very bland, very basic, there's nothing too much into them, while in Genshin every combo can produce different results. And I hear you saying, then what about other RPGs that also don't have elemental reactions? Wouldn't they also have bland character interactions? And to that, I answer our next category because character interactions aren't enough to fully explain this. Characters interacting with enemies is the thing that completes this. And I'm not pausing here because, well, let's see how other RPGs handle elements. They don't interact with each other like in Genshin, but they use a different way to make elements important, and that is weaknesses and resistances. From Final Fantasy to Pokemon to modern gacha games, the standard rule and way to use elements is to make them be weak to attacks from other elements and to resist attacks from other elements. A simple and effective strategy that just works. It simplifies team building because most of the time you will bring a team that is full of the counter element of your enemy, and in very rare situations will you bring a character that isn't of that counter element. Maybe because they are just really good at stat buffing, or they have a really weird and powerful combo with another character in the team. I can only mention the two gachas that I have played with such a system, and those are Crash Fever, rest in peace, and NieR Reincarnation, also rest in peace. But those games worked exactly like this. The main way characters interacted with enemies and the main way that their elements mattered was through simple counter systems, and most of my teams were same element teams. And usually, to add a bit of depth and uniqueness to these elements or characters to separate them more, status effects would usually be assigned to these elements. Simple example is an ice attack in Pokemon causing the enemy to become frozen, or some sort of dark attack in Persona causing confusion. So once again, we ask, how do characters and their elements interact with enemies in Wuwa? The answer is, not at all. And when I mean not at all, I genuinely mean it. Not at all. They simply don't. There isn't a single difference to what element you use to defeat an enemy. To go back to those examples I gave in the previous category, the difference between an Aero Giyan and a Havoc Giyan is none. It doesn't exist because there's no difference in if an enemy gets attacked by Aero damage or Havoc damage. Absolutely none. And it made me go crazy once I noticed this. It felt and feels extremely wrong. I must have missed something or haven't unlocked or found it yet. But that wasn't the case. Except that I'm lying to you, sorry. Because attributes in Wuwa do actually do something, but only enemies can use them. Yup. There are two things that enemies can do with their elements. First, enemies have resistances to their elements actually. Easily found in the overworld bosses, they take less damage from the element they are. The Aero Monkey takes less Aero damage and so on for other bosses and regular enemies. And the second thing is that many enemies and their attacks can place debuffs of various effects on your characters. Glacio enemies can stack a Glacio effect on you, and if it reaches 10 stacks, you get frozen. Why are enemies the only ones that get to have fun with their elements? Why did they not use these stackable debuffs and translate them to the playable characters? This is what made me go nuts. Just this, bringing these effects and letting players use them fixes the entire combat system. So many things change, I cannot find a word to describe just how game-changing doing this will be, and would have been. Now our comparison of an Aero Giyan and a Havoc Giyan completely changes. Let's make it so that when Giyan uses his liberation, his attacks now apply stacks of an element. Our Aero Giyan now will apply Aero stacks, and let's say when those hit 10 stacks, an Aero Shockwave launches from the enemy, think of Child's Riptide. And our Havoc Gian applies Havoc stacks, and let's say reducing the attack of enemies, just like enemies do right now. And the higher the stack count, the attack reduction becomes more severe. Now the attribute system has a purpose, and team building also can get a helping hand. Let's say that Sephiroth applies Electro stacks with his skill, so 3 activations is 3 stacks, but now let's also make it that when he unleashes his empowered heavy attack, that for each stack of Electro the enemy has, the empowered heavy attack deal more damage. Now a good combo would be to find another Electro character to give Sephiroth more stacks, and these are just the tip of the iceberg on using these attribute stacks. And the thing is, as I said, this isn't coming from nothing. It isn't a weird idea I randomly came up with. It's already in the game, but enemies are the only ones to use it. And this is the biggest problem in WoA. Stacking with the bland character interactions as well shows how flawed the combat is in WoA. It may look flashy in all of those posts all around social media, or using weird fighting game tricks, but at the end, nothing changes when it comes to defeating an enemy. There just aren't any creative or interesting ways to defeat an enemy, no interesting combos between characters. If it isn't a weakness and resistance system, or a reaction system, or the debuff system in the game, then what point is there to assign attributes to characters in WoA? Longevity. And I abruptly end the combat chapter to bring forth the thing that gets affected the most because of the flaws in the combat system. Longevity. You can get away with not having attributes in a game similar to WoA, but it most likely means that you expect that game to not be that long. Perfect example is the NieR and Devil May Cry series, or just action RPGs. Flashy, smooth combat, lacking elements most of the time, but lasting for about 40 hours, not years, and with a push to play daily. And classic JRPGs that last for hundreds of hours use the systems I have already mentioned to keep you interested. I simply cannot see WoA surviving for more than a couple of months or at most a year without fixing the combat, because there is no incentive to pull for characters. With the Gian example I gave above, it's simple to understand, I believe. Why would you pull for another heavy attack DPS? They have no difference to Gian, and they would not do anything different when paired with Mortefi, who goes well with heavy attack characters. The results would be exactly the same, you would just do different colored damage. Why would you pull for another Mortefi that is Spectro instead of Fusion? Nothing would change. And with no reason for players to pull, except for those that like the character for design reasons or voice acting reasons, how are you supposed to keep a game like WoA alive, where there are lots and lots of costs? Well, there is a way, and it is the worst one. Power creep. What is the difference between the now Aero Gian and a future Havoc Gian? The numbers, of course, and now Aero Gian is thrown in the trash. Same with our Fusion and Spectro Mortefi. Power creep is the absolute worst and most cowardly way to force players to get new characters. But if it pulls money, and it keeps the game alive, then it does exactly that, and players are usually just forced to accept it or quit. And now we reach the end of this video. I know that many of the things I said sounded very negative. I kinda hope that I presented my thoughts not in a way that says that I hope WoA fails, but in a way that says I hope WoA succeeds, because that's what I want. I really enjoy the game, but for Kuro to advertise and show how focused they want WoA to be in combat, all I see is a not finished system. I've heard that the game was supposed to maybe launch later this year, so maybe that is it. Maybe Kuro is already working on something that fixes combat. But if they aren't, then I hope that, hell, maybe this video is a wake-up call and they start working on something. There are some more things I could mention if you wish for another less focused video on a specific thing, something less detailed on some other things that are good and bad about the game, like how echoes and their abilities are very simple, and just DPSs will always just use the ones that give them stat buffs, or they won't even use echoes in general from some showcases that I've seen. Instead of having any creative effects on those echoes, or perhaps using them to apply attribute stacks, hey? Or how the echo set effects are also pretty simple. But I can forgive this one because the game just launched. Genshin didn't always have the weird artifact sets it has now, but it did try to play a bit with them. Viridescent Verener being an example that has been in the game since launch, or Thundering Fury as well had weird effects. And WoW also does something similar with the Healing Echo set or the Energy Recharge Echo set. There are bases there of weird and complicated echoes things, but most of them all just boil down to stat buffs, because there isn't anything else to really do, right, to affect combat. Really, the only one I really like is the turtle. The bell turtle is one of the most creative ones, I think, for effects that it has, for abilities that it has, not effects. There are many other. We could easily talk about the Tower of Adversity and its good things and bad things, or the door, because it's a door, but the roguelike mode is really awesome. If you really want, leave a like and say it in the comments that you would like to talk more about these things, just not in super detail. But things I didn't and was never planning to mention is any sort of technical stuff. Seeing people complain about performance issues on their shitty laptop or old as fuck PC or phone is just so dumb. There are some legit problems in performance, and I've seen them myself. But Kuro has shown that they acknowledge and listen to those, and more importantly, they try to fix them and all of the other bugs or issues. Trust me, I have had my fair share of bugs, like the one time my Gian was literally sent to infinite coordinates, and even a game restart didn't get him unstuck. But those aren't design issues, and again, if they show that they are trying to fix them, then players won't go away. But the real issues that many times go under the radar because they can be tough to see and especially understand are game design issues. And I hope that I managed to, to the best of my ability, explain what I believe are those kinds of issues that exist within WoW right now. And I hope that, you can see that I offered any sort of fixes that can be put on the main issue, which is the combat system. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and maybe you also learned something about game design. If the latter is true, then I am extremely happy. It's really tough to teach somebody game design without telling them, go play a bajillion games and study them, or just study game design itself. It's really tough. It does not come out naturally. Goodbye, hope to see you in another WoW video if possible, and as I said, like the video and comment if you wish to see another part, a indirect sequel to this, where we go on some other aspects of the game, but in less detail. So, again, goodbye, hope to see you in another WoW video, if possible.